In this week's On My Shelf, I'm talking about a nonfiction journalistic read, a middle grade memoir, a new book launch resource I've discovered, the craziness of life, and my brainstorm process for settings. I read all over the place. I'm just as likely to get carried away by a good fiction story as I am a great nonfiction book. One of those nonfiction books that recently carried me away was Erik Larson's Dead Wake. Dead Wake is the story of the Lusitania, a luxury ocean liner that was sunk during the 10th month of World War I. The Lusitania was one of the fastest liners in service that carried, at the time it was sunk, a record number of children and infants. This was one of those stories that you find yourself desperately wishing would happen differently, even though you know how it ends, kind of like the Titanic. It was a gripping read and an important contribution to our historical canon on World War I. Larson is a journalist and a novelist, so he writes the true story with an expert hand. I found myself unable to put it down. Another story that captivated me was one written for the middle grade age. Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson is a nonfiction memoir written in poetry, which I think is the best of both worlds. Woodson takes her readers through her birth and her growing up years during the Civil Rights Movement. She shares about her family background and all the setbacks she experienced as a little girl, and when writing began to call for her. She wraps up the book saying that we always have a choice on who we are going to become, no matter what our families look like, no matter what our circumstances are. I found it to be incredibly inspirational and also a lovely read. I'm always fascinated by the lives of other people, and I think it's an important piece of literature in the children's book world, because Woodson was a woman who grew up during a time our children can only imagine. Knowing that her stories are real and true will help that history come to life for children who read it. I'm looking forward to sharing this story with my boys. During my Sabbath week, I launched another book that was part of my Family on Purpose series, which is an episodic series that spans an entire year of my journals from a time when my family and I were learning more about our family values and trying to practice them in everyday life. The book launch did not do as well as I had hoped, and I spent nearly the entire Sabbath week hijacked by this disappointment because, writers are moody and dramatic. But then I decided to start researching successful book launches. I have, of course, found people like Jeff Walker, who is the brain behind Product Launch Formula, and a few other resources. But this time I also discovered this guy named Daniel Decker, who is an expert in book launches. Most of the information I've found out there is more general in nature and doesn't have to do specifically with book launches. Daniel Decker trains on the proper way to do book launches. He has a great resource called the Author Platform Summit, where he brings together leading marketing experts who talk about successful marketing tactics that authors can use to promote their books. I found it really helpful. I think we can always learn more about marketing as authors. More and more, marketing is being left up to the authors, no matter what kind of publishing you choose. Daniel Decker's work is a great resource to have. You guys, life is crazy. We had our boys in a soccer camp recently, and I have to say, I have no idea how other parents do something like that. I felt like we were losing control of everything, because our boys were gone from 3 until 6 every evening, putting baths and bedtime later than they normally are. I felt off the entire week, and we're still trying to catch up. Also, I had to deal with stinky soccer socks left all over the floor, which I've never had the pleasure of picking up until last week. They are just as gross as you can imagine. I'm just hoping my boys don't take much interest in sports when they're older, because I'm pretty beat. Last week, I talked about the brainstorm process that I use for characters. So this week, I thought I'd talk a little bit about how I brainstorm my settings, since that's usually the next step in my process. Settings are similar to characters. We have to know more about them than we think we do. In my fantasy series Farendale, there are many settings that have magical characteristics, and some of them are home to dragons, and some are home to sea monsters, and some are home to ordinary people. But are they the people who are specially equipped in things like working with their hands? Or are they the people who are specially equipped at telling the future? Keeping all of that straight is important for a story, and it's also important to differentiate our settings. So for fantasy series, I typically start with a map, way zoomed out, and then I take each piece of the map and zoom in. I describe the land as I see it in my head. I measure its corners. I paint it with color. For stories that are closer to real life, I take pictures. Sometimes it's a place I've visited because it feels like it has the perfect personality for the characters I've created. Sometimes it's a place I find on the internet because it's not easy to get to all locations with 6 kids in tow, especially when they're complaining that we're doing this again. Pictures help me bring to life what those places look like. I even do this with homes, snapping pictures of homes I imagine my characters live in. It just helps me form those pictures in my mind, even if I never see the interior. Writers can really be helped with photographs, and I find great inspiration from pictures of all kinds. Sometimes my kids will point out something interesting, and I'll have to snap a photo because it's a perfect quirk for one of my books. It's fun to go on location hunts, trying to find a perfect place for a character to live. Although my kids would tell you different. That's the breaks of being the kids of a writer. For more about me or my books, sign up for my email newsletter, where I share an inside look at life and the projects I'm working on, and my current novel of the year. If you have any questions about writing or books, or how I manage a writing career with 6 little ones, leave them in the comments and I'll get to them in future episodes. For more on my shelf, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.